Welcome everyone to the big clash of the day. Fabiano Caruana, world number 2, takes on Magnus Carlsen. And Caruana opens the game with 1 e4. Caruana beat Ding Liren in the previous round. He gets up and takes off his jacket, while Magnus Carlsen had lost to Pragnananda. Magnus had played the Sicilian in that game, but today opts for a more solid opening with e4, e5, brings out his knight on c6, and we have the Italian. What could be more exciting than this? Two of the best players in the world and playing the opening, which is trending these days, the Italian. d3 played, and now what is Magnus's choice going to be? Bishop c5. Yes, he goes for the safe option, the normal, the main line with bishop to c5. And now white castles here. So black now has to decide whether he wants to castle immediately. He goes d6 and keeps things flexible for the time being. And Fabi plays the move c3. Well, with c3 you are always angling for a d4 break. Magnus does not really worry. He plays a6, and if d4 is played, he will put his bishop back on a7. So Caruana plays a4, gaining space on the queen side. Now Magnus puts his bishop back on a7. White has many different ways to play. Caruana opts for a3. Another option is a5. You can go bishop g5. You can go knight d2. You can go knight a3. This is what makes Italian so interesting at top level. You make these little moves and they change the character of the position. Now bishop e3. This is a very, very interesting decision by Fabi. Magnus thinks for just a minute and takes the bishop. And he's ready to give white double pawns, but more importantly, he's ready to open up the f file. So now the rook on f1 is open. The bishop comes out to e6. So Magnus is happy with the fact that it will be like a symmetrical structure. Caruana takes the bishop. And now queen f takes is very likely. If you try to make a double attack with queen b3, then queen c8 should defend both. So Caruana goes first knight d2. He finishes his development, and now Magnus has to decide how is he going to continue here. I think castling seems like the most natural and obvious move to play. Yes, it's castling here. Generally in such structures you find that the games are equalish or drawish, but at the same time there is a lot to play for, like Caruana's rook f2. Well, he's basically letting the queen move away, and then the rooks can double up on the f file. So queen e7 played here, defending the e6 pawn. Queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7. And I think you have to play rook b8. b6 is also playable. I think he can also push his pawn to b6, but rook b8 by Magnus, just simple play. White can go for a5. That is possible to gain more space. But Caruana just doubles on the f file. So he's getting ready for all sorts of things that can happen on the king side. Magnus plays his knight to d8, a useful move because he can shift his knight to f7, place pawn to c6, defend with the queen on e7. And now Fabi brings his queen back to d1. It's a strong move. Because he might want to expand on the queen side with b4. Magnus himself is expanding with b5. Well, one plan is to take, which is what Caruana does, and after pawn takes, now to play the move b4, and in that way, you know, you gaining space on the queen side, stopping black's pawns from advancing. But Fabi goes knight h2. He opens up both his rooks and he's angling for knight g4. So Magnus plays his knight to f7. Well, knight g4 anyway still is possible, because if you take, I can take with the queen. He plays his knight to g4. This is a good move here. And you have to be alert for some sacrifices that can happen in this position. But for the time being, Magnus just brings his knight back to d7. And now Fabi tries to go a little bit more aggressive. He goes d4 here. And Magnus plays his pawn to c5, trying to fight back on the space front. Caruana plays his queen to e2. So slowly, this is a slow maneuvering game. But Magnus decides to play his pawn to c4. And with that, he's gained some more space on the queen side. And later on, he can push his pawn to b4. Well, knight goes back to h2 here. And how is Black going to respond to this? Magnus brings his knight back to f6. I believe Fabiano will go back to g4. Yes, he does. And now Magnus either can take here or he can move back. I think moving back, he comes back, knight d7. Maybe a tacit draw offer here. Caruana quickly plays knight h2. He's happy with the draw. Will Magnus agree to a draw by bringing his knight back to f6? You can see him thinking for quite some time. And after 12 minutes of thought, he goes rook a8, fighting on. This is what makes Magnus Carlsen truly special. b3 played now. So Fabi wants to sort of break down this structure and plays his pawn to b3. Magnus takes the pawn on b3. Now taking on b5 would be absolutely incorrect because after rook b8, this pawn on b3 is very strong. So he plays knight takes b3 and now rook c8 is played, attacking the pawn on c3. Queen comes up to d3. Well, you could have traded the b5 pawn for the c3 pawn, but for the time being, he feels that queen d3 is a logical move here. And Magnus plays his knight to f6. Magnus being very calm, cool and collected here. Caruana goes back to d2, defending his pawn on e4. And now the queen comes to c7, attacking the c3 pawn once again. You have to take the pawn on b5 as Caruana. Yes, he takes. And now Magnus can come in and snatch the pawn on c3. The only reason why Black can claim to have a small edge here is because now the e3 pawn is hanging. So perhaps it has to be dealt with slightly carefully, because if you go queen e2, you already are losing the d4 pawn. So that's the reason why he plays knight f3. And his point is that he wants to win the pawn on e5. Magnus goes and chops off the pawn on e3. But now you have d takes e5 happening. So d takes e5 comes in, you have to take back the pawn. If you take on e4, I can take with the knight, queen takes, and then just simply rook e1, and white is doing pretty okay. Instead, he goes d5. Magnus says, I'm going to take this pawn for free on e4. I'm not going to trade off. Well, Caruana is the first one to capture the pawn on e5. And he now rook c5 is met with queen d3, which is the reason why this tactic doesn't work. So Magnus goes knight g5. And now he's attacking the e4 pawn twice. And this is something to be carefully observed. A trade of queens is offered, but Magnus, today his willpower is on full show. He comes back queen to c5. He tells Fabi, your knight is hanging, and you can see the focus on Magnus's face. This is when Magnus is at his most dangerous, when he can focus with all his might. Rook d8 played, attacking the queen. The queen has to choose a good square to go to. Maybe queen e2 is a decent move, but Caruana goes queen b1, and that's also playable. But now, whoa, Magnus goes knight to h5. If you take here, then rook takes d2 is ultra powerful. So that's the reason why queen c1 is played here, offering a trade of queens. Magnus is completely focused. The queen goes back to a7. Can Caruana pursue the queen to get a draw? Yes, he pursues it. Queen a1 on the board. Not easy. Queen b6. I guess you can keep the pursuing game going on with queen b1. Magnus has 6 minutes on the clock. Caruana has 5 minutes. We are still three more moves to make. Queen b1 played, offering a trade once again. How does Magnus avoid the trade? Well, queen c5. And Caruana continues to pursue the queen to exchange it. Magnus finally goes behind. Now what is there more to play? You have an equalish position. Opposite you is the world number 2. And I think anyone would have agreed to a draw in such a position. But not Magnus Carlsen. He takes on f2. And after rook takes f2, 5 minutes 20 seconds for Magnus, 5 minutes 5 seconds for Caruana. Queen takes g5 has been played. And queen c3 played here by Caruana. And now Magnus brings his knight to g3. So he's looking at some sacrifices on d2 followed by picking up the pawn on e4. Caruana is a little bit careless. He goes king h2 and Magnus takes on d2. Now very important not to take back, because after rook knight takes e4 it's going to be very dangerous. So he goes queen takes g3, and after takes queen takes, we have now reached a queen endgame where white is going to forcibly lose a pawn. King g1 played, queen chops off the pawn. Magnus Carlsen is one of the greatest queen endgame players. There is no doubt about it. The way he plays queen endgames is an absolute symphony. That's because his theoretical knowledge is excellent, and so is his understanding of the positions and the pieces. He goes queen e7. Caruana is not going to give this up easily. He knows that he can hold a draw, and that's the thing here. Two youngsters having an ideological battle here between each other. Queen e8 played. Well, if Caruana wins this position, he will be very close to the rating of Magnus Carlsen. But right now it seems that he has no opportunity to win this. Queen e7 played, attacking the pawn on h4. How will Magnus win? This is also a question. He first goes queen d4. This is the thing about Magnus. Just try to learn. He first always improves the position of the queen regardless of anything. Check, king h2, and queen comes to f6. So first improving the position completely. And now queen e8 played here by Caruana. And so king h6 is played by Magnus. He's ready to start moving in with his king this way. Wow. e5 is played now. The pawn is slowly moving ahead. This is the pawn on whom Magnus has put all his money. Queen a4, and now Magnus plays queen to f4, offering a trade of queens. Queen comes in with a check, king comes up, and this is slow and steady. What a beautiful exploitation of the advantage. Now queen comes to c7, attacking the g7 pawn. Queen d4, check. And this is the moment of truth. Now where do you bring your king? King f1 is fine. But look at this decision by Magnus. King to f4. And you must take the g7 pawn. So now the material is even. Also black is under a lot of pressure. So he plays king e3. Wow. He's just moving his king away somewhere here and then pushing the e pawn down the board. King g1, pawn push to e4. And now Fabiano Caruana needs to think quickly. He has just few seconds left on the clock. Check here. And you have to move your king. But where exactly? He goes king e2 check. h1 pawn comes up to e3. And well, what does Caruana do? This entire structure with the queen right in the center and the pawns and the king is really good for him. For Magnus, queen check by Caruana. King comes to f2. The position is still a draw if Caruana plays it carefully. He needs to give a check on a2 and after e2 play queen f7 check. That's the only way forward. Fabi needs to find this way to draw, but he plays king h2 with very little time on the clock. And now Magnus is completely winning after e2. And I think he spots it. He's like e2 there. He knows he's winning. Caruana resigns and Magnus Carlsen has managed to convert this. Absolutely stunning endgame play by Magnus. You can see that he's pleased with himself from an equal